out. And really, the mathematics of games and these kind of features have been of interest to mathematicians for a long time. Actually, the origins of game theory, the origins of mathematics of games originated with poker. In the 1920s, a researcher called John von Neumann, brilliant mathematician, he was the youngest professor in the history of the University of Berlin, wasn't so good at poker though. On the face of it, poker is a perfect game for a mathematician, right? It's the probability you get a certain hand, the probability your opponent gets a different one. But von Neumann realized that there's more to it than that. As he said, real life consists of bluffing, of little tactics of deception, of asking myself, what does the other man suppose I'm going to do? And he wanted to study that kind of feedback between what you think and what they think and they think you think. And he looked at very simplified forms of poker. And one situation he looked at was two players, they each get dealt a single card, and then they put some money in the pot at the start. And the first player has the choice that they can either just stick with their bets, in which case they just turn over their cards and compare them, or they can raise the stakes, and then it's up to the second player to decide whether they meet that bet or not. So two players, one card, money in the middle. What von Neumann found is that in these kind of games, you've got almost a tug of war, because each player is trying to maximize their gain while simultaneously trying to minimize their opponent's gain. If you think a game like poker, anything your opponent wins comes out of your pocket. So you're trying to maximize what you get while at the same time trying to minimize what they get. Which means that there's this kind of equilibrium point. There's a point at which the two sort of conflicting forces balance. And in this situation, analyzing it for the game, he found that this situation in which no player would benefit by changing their strategy, this balance point for the first player, the strategy was as follows, that if they got a very high card, then they should raise the stakes. Intuitively, this makes sense. If you have a good card, you might as well bet on it. If they had a middling card, it didn't make sense for them to raise the stakes, didn't have a great chance of winning, but they still had some chance. So in other words, they should just stick with their existing bet. But when von Neumann looked at what happened when you got the lowest kind of cards, he found that it doesn't make sense to stick with your bet, because if you turn over the cards, you're probably going to lose. Instead, you should up the stakes. So in other words, you should bluff. And actually, up to this point, gamblers had often, poker players had often bluffed in games, but it was always seen as a quirk of human psychology, a kind of innate trickery that humans came up with. But here was von Neumann showing that it was a mathematical necessity. In other words, he'd proved that bluffing is a necessary part of life. And this idea was kind of fundamental to game theory, that you can have these strategies put together. In this very simple version of poker, though, there's almost a list of fixed rules we can follow. So in other words, if you get a high or low card, you raise the stakes. If you get a middling card, you stick with what you've got. And in any game where you've got all the information in front of you, so other games, for instance, things like noughts and crosses, checkers, chess, all of these games, in theory, have a fixed set of rules. It's known as pure strategy. So